Hello chess friends, welcome back to another episode of our introductions in the game of chess. This will be our last video on the introduction of the game of chess. We have been talking about how each of the different pieces of the game moves. We have uploaded a video where we talked about how to arrange each piece on the board, placing each of the pieces where they belong, their positions on the board. Alright, so this is our chessboard. It's already arranged, perfectly arranged. So we have seen how this arrangement is done. Alright, so we have also had other videos where we talked about how the pawn moves. We have talked about how this pawn moves. We have also talked about how the knight moves. We have seen the bishop also. We have seen how the bishop moves. We have also seen how the rook moves. Okay? We have also seen how the queen moves. The queen, this is the queen. We've seen how the queen moves. So the last piece on the board to be covered is the king. So in this particular video, we'll be looking at everything about the king. We're talking about the king. This is the king. Alright? So this video will be our last video under the playlist Introduction of the game of chess. Introduction to chess. Alright, so the movement of the king is quite it has a lot of rules. It follows rules. So in this video, I would advise you take a pen and paper, write down all the rules and the moves so you won't mix them up. Okay? Alright, so let's not forget, I'm still your host, SPD, and this is our chess channel, SPD Lord Chess. Please remember to subscribe. Just click the subscribe button down below and the notification icon so you'll be notified once. Alright, and don't forget to like our videos, give us thumbs up, and also leave some comments in the comment section. You can also share our videos on social media. We'll be very happy to hear from our fans what you think about our channel. Alright, let's continue with the business of the day. So, like I said, we'll be looking at the king. This is the king. This is the king. This is the king right here. The king has a cross. It has a cross. That's the cross. This is the cross here. Okay? This is the king. Alright, so the king's movement, like I said, follows so many rules. Alright? So the first movement we are going to be looking, we'll be seeing for the king will be its one-step movement. The king makes one-step movement, just like the pawn. The king makes one-step movement. Alright? Okay. But another important thing to note is that the king, just like every other piece at the back here, these generals here, they have one thing in common, with the exception of the knight. With the exception of these two knights, every other generals here have one thing in common. Every other generals at the back here have one thing in common, and that thing is they can't jump over this pawn defense. They can't jump over this pawn defense, this line of pawns. For any of these generals to get out into the field, into this battlefield, for them to come out into this battlefield, they need an opening there should be an opening in this wall, this pawn wall. Okay, so it is only the knight that can jump over this pawn wall. Every other piece at the back here requires an opening to be made for it to come out. Alright, so the same goes for the king. The king also cannot jump over the pawn wall, the pawn defense. For the king to come out, there must be an opening. Alright, so let's have some openings. Let me just assume that this pawn is somewhere here. Alright, and this is somewhere here. Also this is somewhere here. Alright, so the first movement of the king which we'll be looking at is the one-step movement. One-step movement. The king makes one-step movement in any direction. One-step movement in any direction. The king can move vertically, one step. The king can also move horizontally, one step. The king can as well move diagonally, one step. Can you see that? That is a very interesting move of the king. The king can make one-step movement in any direction. The king can make one-step movement in any direction at all, both vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. So this is the one-step movement of the king. This is one-step movement of the king. Vertical one-step movement, horizontal one-step movement, and diagonal one-step movement in any direction. Horizontal, vertical, diagonal, 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 horizontal. Can you see this? Horizontal, vertical, vertical this way, horizontal this way, diagonal this way. Alright, so this is one-step movement of the king. One-step movement in any direction, both forward vertically, backward again vertically. So the king can make both forward movements and backward movement. The king can move both forward and backward, one step only, any direction at all. One step forward, one step backward. One step forward vertical, one step forward vertical. One step backward vertical. One step backward diagonal. One step forward diagonal. One step horizontal. One step horizontal again. You can see this. So this is how the king moves. One steps in any direction, both forward and backward. Alright? Okay. So the next move of the king will be the double step movement of the king. Alright, before that, let us see how the king terminates. While the king moves its one-step movement in any direction, the king also terminates whatever obstacle is placed in its way. If the king encounters any obstacle on its way while moving its one-step movement in any direction, the king terminates that obstacle. For example, if the king is right here and this opponent pawn is right here, okay, can you see this? Alright, I can move my king one step vertically forward to terminate this pawn, just like this, and the pawn is terminated. Alright, I can also, let's assume that this pawn is here. I can also terminate this pawn diagonally. Alright, So these 2 pawns have been displaced by the king through vertical movement 1 step and diagonal movement 1 step also. All right, okay. So that is how the king terminates. The king terminates while it moves both vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. All right, so the next move of the king to be looked at will be its double step movement. Now the king, like I said, has a lot of rules governing its movement. So please take a pen and paper, write down the following rules. Before the king can make this double step movement, there are about 4 to 5 rules that must be satisfied. 4 to 5 rules must be satisfied before the king can make its double movement. All right? And this double movement of the king is only in one direction. Only, okay, let me say not in one direction. It can be in 2 directions. It is in 2 directions, but along the same line. All right? It's only horizontal movement. It involves only horizontal movement. Okay? All right, so the double movement of the king is called castling. It has a special name. It's called castling. C-A-S-T-L-I-N-G, castling. Now this movement, for this movement to be possible, the movement involves the king and any of its rook. Any of its rook. This is the king. This is the king and this is the rook, right? Yes. So before castling is possible, the king must satisfy certain rules and the rook must also satisfy certain rules. Now you ask me, what are these rules? Now before castling will be done, the first rule number 1 says there must be space between the king and the rook. Look at the rook here. The first rule says before you can make castling movement, there must be space, empty space between the king and the rook. All right? So this is rule number 1. For castling, for the king to make its double movement, the king's double movement is called castling. And this double movement is only in one, it involves only horizontal movement. It can make castling this direction. It can also make castling this direction. All right? Let me make space on this other side. All right. So assuming the board is this way, all right? This is one rook at this edge. This is the other rook at this edge, right? Now the king is still in its position, right? Yes. So we can see there is empty space between the king here and the rook. Now, also we have an empty space between the king here and this rook. Now, castling movement can be done either way. We can make castling movement this way, the right, towards the right side, or castling towards the left. Castling can only be done once. A castling movement of the king can only be done once, and you can only do it either to the left or you do it to the right. Okay? Like I said, there are rules before this castling movement is achieved. Rule number 1 says whichever side you want to move, if it is this side, then you must make sure there is empty space between this rook here and this king. And if you have to move your castle in this direction, then you must make space between the king here and this rook. Okay? Alright, so if I'm to make my castling movement in this direction, okay, I must ensure that there is empty space between the king here and this rook. Okay, now this making castling movement this direction is called short castling, because the empty space between the king here and the rook is just two squares, while this direction is called long castling because we have 1, 2, 3 empty squares. Okay, so this direction is called long castling, while this direction is called short castling. Okay, now so rule number 1 before castling is done is that there must be empty space between the king and the rook. Now to get this castling, the king moves 2 steps, 1, 2 horizontally and stops there. Then the rook will move and stay in the position immediately before the king's initial position. All right, so remember that this is where the king left. This was the king's initial position. All right, so this rook will move and stay in this position, the position immediately before the king's initial position. This is the king's initial position, and this is the immediate position before this initial position of the king. All right, so this is short castling. This is short castling. The king was initially at this position, then it will move 2 steps horizontally, 1, 2, and stop here, while the rook that is here will change this position also and stay immediately the position immediately before the king's initial position. If you don't know the king's initial position, just know that the king will move double steps horizontally and the rook will stay close to the king on the other side of the king. All right, okay, so let's demonstrate this castling this other side. All right, the king will move double steps, 1, 2, then the rook will move and stay close to the king on the other side, just like this. If you examine it well, you will see that this is the king's initial position and the rook is staying in the position immediately before the king's initial position. All right, so that's it. This is castling movement of the king, double movement of the king, which occurs horizontally, either towards the right or towards the left. This movement is only possible once some rules are observed. So the number 1 rule is that there must be space between the king and the rook. There must be space between the king and the rook. Now number 2 rule to be observed is the king must not be on check. All right, well, this will be the first time I'll be using this word check. Now the word check is used in the game of chess to show that the king is in danger. Remember that this game of chess is all about battle, war between 2 nations, the black nation and the white nations. All right, now let's assume that, okay, when there is just, let's take a real life scenario where there is war between 2 kingdoms. Okay, once the king of a kingdom falls, that kingdom, even if the kingdom has 1 million soldiers, army fighting for the kingdom, once their king gives up or falls, once their king falls, the kingdom is automatically taking over. All the generals, all the army, soldiers, fighters, warlords will surrender their weapon once their king falls, because the king is the grand commander of the army, of the fighters, of the warlords. Without the king, nobody to give order. So the king must be protected at all costs. The king must be protected at all costs. Now, once your king falls, you have lost the game. Now, check. The word check is used to show that your king, that you, the king, is in danger. Now, once check is observed, the king has 2 or 3 options. You either run away, defend yourself. You either run away, or you defend yourself, or you terminate the danger on your part. Okay, so before castling movement is done, the king must not be on check. The king must not be in danger. Alright? The king must not be in danger. Okay, now we have talked about how the queen moves, right? Okay, let me make a space here. Assume that this queen, the Black Nation's queen, this is the Black Nation's queen. Assuming the Black Nation's queen is already out for blood and is standing right here, facing, let me remove this guy. The Black Nation's queen, the Black Nation's queen is already out for blood, facing the White Nation's king. You would see that this king, this white king, is in very big danger. So you will tell your opponent, check. This black queen will tell this king, check. You're on check. So this king now cannot terminate this queen, because the king can only move 1 step, remember? And there is no other person, no other piece right here to terminate this queen. So the king has just one option: to run away, leave this line of action. This line has been taken over by this queen. So the king has only one option: you dodge the arrows from this black queen. You dodge the arrows, okay? So you can dodge this way, you dodge this way. Just select any position that will be safe for you. So that is how the king can dodge the danger of check, the check status of the king. All right. So before the king can make castling movement, the second rule says the king must not be on check. The king must not be in danger this way or any other way. The king must not be on check. Castling movement is not possible if the king is on check already. Okay? Alright. Rule number 3 says, if the king is to make castling movement, remember that castling movement involves the king going double steps this direction, alright? Now there must be empty space between this king and the rook, right? Yes. Now, the rule number 3 says, since the king will be moving from here to this spot, there must not be danger in this direction that the king is to move. If the king is to move this other direction, there must not be danger in this direction as well. That means that, assuming this queen is somewhere here, assuming this queen is somewhere, let me just make a scenario where the king cannot. Alright, look at this now. take a look at this. This is the black queen. You will notice that this black queen has taken over this line. This black queen has also taken over this line. Remember that the queen can move both diagonally, vertically, and horizontally. Alright? So this queen has taken over this line. The king cannot move into this line. It will be on check, it will be in danger. The king also cannot move, cannot enter this black line, because it will be on check also, it will be in danger due to this queen here. This queen has taken over this line. Can you see that? Alright, so rule number 3 says, for the king to make castling movement, it must not be on check, and it must not pass through a dangerous path. It must not pass through a path where it will be in danger. Alright? Let's assume that the king is to move this direction. 1, 2. Right? And then this comes here, right? But you will observe that if this happens, the king will be on check, because this path is taken over by the queen. You can see that. So the king will be on check if it makes castling movement this direction. So castling movement is not possible in this direction. Castling movement is not possible in this direction, because this spot, there is harm here, there is danger here. Also, if the king is to make castling movement this direction, it will pass through 1, 2, and it cannot enter here because of this queen. Can you see this now? So this is rule number 3. The king must not pass through a dangerous path. This path is danger. The king cannot pass through here when making this castling movement. So castling movement is not possible in this direction, and is not also possible in this direction. Rule number 4 says, before castling will be done, both the king and whichever rook you are using must not have moved. They must not have moved before. They must still be in their original positions. If you are to make castling between the king and this rook, then this rook must not have moved before. It must not have moved before, and the king must also not move before. The king must not have moved before. So, for castling to be possible, this king should not make any movement. This rook should not make any movement, and also this rook should not make any movement until you castle. Alright? If you make a move with this rook here, then no more castling in this direction. Even if you take it back here, so far you've made a move with this rook already, castling is null and void in this direction. No more castling between the king here and this rook. You may now consider castling in this direction. Then, if you also make a move, if this rook has moved already, then castling is also cancelled in this direction. No more castling in this direction. Before castling is done, both the king and the rook must not have moved before. They must not have moved already. They must not have moved at all. Alright? So if the rook is still here, it has not made any move at all, and this rook has not made any move at all, but you made a move with your king either here or here, anywhere. So far you moved this king already. No more, even if you bring it back here, no more castling, either in this direction or this direction. No more castling. Once the king moves, no more castling. If the king has not moved, if you move this, there can still be castle in this direction. If you move this, there can still be castle in this direction. But if you move this, the king, then no more castling in either direction. Let us also note that castling movement can only be done once. Castling movement can only be done once. If you castle this direction, it is once, no more castling again. Once you've castled this direction, you can't castle again this direction. Castling is done only once. So you should decide whichever the direction you want to castle. Either you castle the long castling or you castle the short castling. Once you've done one castling, you can't make any other castling again. Castling movement is only done once. Castling movement is only done once. Alright, so this is how the king makes its double movement. The double movement of the king is called castling, and it is only possible just once and follows some rules before it can be possible. Now, the first rule, in summary, the first rule before castling is done is that there must be space between the king and the rook. There must be space between the king and the rook. And you can either castle this direction, short castling, or you castle this direction, the long castling. This is the long castling because we have 3 squares between them, and this is the short castling because we have just 2 squares between them. Alright? So rule number 1, there must be empty space between the king and the rook. Then rule number 2, the king must not be on check while it moves. The king must not be on check. If the king is on check, then you have to remove whatever that is checking the king. Remember that check means danger. So if the king is on check already, the king is already in danger, you either remove the danger or you block the danger. Because if you move your king away from the danger, once you move the king, no more castling. So if the king is already on check, you either remove the danger by terminating the piece that is making the king on danger, that is giving the king danger, or you block that danger with another piece so that you will not move your king. Alright? Once you move your king, no more castling. No more castling again. So rule number 2, your king must not be on check. Rule number 3, the path to which your king is to follow to its double movement, to make its double movement, must not be a dangerous path. For example, look at this path. If the king is to move double step this way, it will pass through this spot 1, 2, right? But this spot now is dangerous for the king because of this black queen. All right. So this rule number 3 is not fulfilled in this side of the castling. So this side of castling now is not possible because rule number 3 says if the king is to make a castling, it must not pass through a dangerous path. It must not pass through a dangerous path. All right. The king must not pass through a dangerous path. So the king cannot make castling in this direction. Rule number 4, if the king is to make castling, it must not castle and put itself in danger. For example, if the king is to castle this direction, 1, 2, right? You will see that this king now is already in danger if it enters here due to this queen. This queen has taken over this spot. You can see that. So rule number 4 says castling is not also possible this way, because if the king makes castling this way, it will enter a dangerous spot. So this spot is danger. So the king cannot castle and enter this spot. So this, because of this queen that is here now, castling in this direction is also null and void. So rule number 4 says that if the king is to castle, wherever the king is to enter, the new position must not make the king in danger, must not put the king in danger. So if this king castles this direction, it will enter 1, 2. Alright? And once it enters here, it will be in danger because of this queen. Therefore, the king cannot castle this direction. So this is rule number 4. Well, rule number 3 says the path through which the king is to pass to make its double movement must not be a dangerous path. So If you look at this other direction, like I said earlier, this part is already dangerous for the king, so the king cannot pass through this part. So rule number 3 says that the king cannot pass through this part because of this queen. This part is dangerous for the king. And rule number 4, the king cannot enter this spot because this spot also will put the king in danger. All right. Then rule number 5. Rule number 5. The king, both the king and the rook must not have moved before. They must not have moved at all. If you move this rook already to this spot or anywhere, once this rook has moved already, then you can't castle with the king and this rook. Then you consider castling this other direction. Then if you also if you've moved this other rook here, then you consider castling between this and this. Then, but if you move your king, castling is completely gone. If you move your king once, then no more castling. Once you move your king, no more castling. All right, so this is the movement of the king. We have seen all the movement of the king, both the one-step movement, the double-step movement, how it terminates. So this will be all for the king. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, hit the like button, the thumbs up button, give us thumbs up for our video, and also comment, give us some comments in our comment section, and try to share our videos. We need more subscribers. We beg you, please subscribe to our channel so that I can bring you better videos. So this particular video will be the last video on our tutorials on the introduction of the game of chess.